The walkie-talkie was the last thing I expected to find at that yard sale. It was a Saturday morning and the town was quiet, the way it always was. Not much happened here, just the usual weekend routines, people mowing their lawns, coffee brewing in corner shops, the distant hum of life going on at its slow, steady pace. I wasn't looking for anything specific when I stopped at the sale. It was one of those cluttered setups, the kind where people emptied their attics onto their driveways, hoping someone would give a few dollars for junk they couldn't throw away. That's when I saw it. A black, scuffed-up walkie-talkie buried beneath a pile of old tools. It looked ancient, the kind with a thick, rubber-coated antenna and heavy dials. Nothing like the sleek, modern ones kids use today. The buttons were worn smooth, and the speaker grill had a small dent in it, like it had been dropped too many times. Something about it caught my attention. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. "That thing still works?" I asked, looking up at the guy running the sale. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, his weathered face partially hidden under a faded baseball cap. His expression was distant, almost reluctant. He barely glanced at it. "Dunno," he muttered. "Haven't used it in years. Found it in my dad's attic after he passed." There was something off about the way he said it. Like he didn't want to talk about it, like he knew something. But I didn't push. It was just an old walkie-talkie. "How much?" He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. $5. I handed him a crumpled bill and took the walkie with me. It wasn't until later that I started wondering why he'd let it go so easily. I lived on the outskirts of town, in a small one-bedroom house that felt too empty most days. I had grown up here, in a place where everyone knew everyone, where the roads were lined with old brick buildings and faded storefronts that hadn't changed in decades. Most people left after high school. I never did. Maybe it was because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Maybe it was because leaving felt too final, like stepping into a world that would swallow me whole. I worked at a hardware store, stocking shelves, fixing broken locks, and selling the same supplies to the same people every day. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. And at night, I sat alone in my house, surrounded by too much silence. That's probably why the walkie-talkie intrigued me. It was a piece of the past, a relic from another time. Something that had once connected people across distances, carrying voices through static-filled airwaves. That night, I put it on the table and stared at it for a while. I wasn't even sure why I bought it. But as the night stretched on, curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, turned the dusty dial, and flicked the power switch. A burst of static crackled through the speaker. Then, a voice, faint, distant. "Hey, it's me! It's been so long!" I froze. My fingers tightened around the walkie. The voice was familiar, like someone I had once known, like a friend I couldn't quite remember. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the talk button. Who the hell was this? The voice on the other end was too familiar, but at the same time, completely wrong. Like an old memory, half forgotten, warped by time, something I should recognize, but couldn't quite place. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he had the wrong frequency. But before I could say anything, the voice cut through the static again. Excited, warm, like an old friend. "Man, I've missed talking to you. I thought you'd forgotten about me." A sharp chill ran up my spine. I gripped the walkie-talkie tighter, my knuckles turning white. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist, like he really believed it, like we'd spoken before. But I didn't know who the hell he was. Still, I pressed the button, my voice uneasy. "Who is this?" The static flared, swallowing the reply. Then, "You still live in that old house on Maple, right? My blood turned to ice. My thumb slipped off the button. I hadn't told him that. I hadn't told anyone. I sat up straighter, staring at the walkie-talkie as if it might somehow explain itself, as if there were some rational answer to what was happening. But there wasn't. The static hummed for a second, and then he spoke again. "Remember when we used to play in the woods behind your house? Remember what we found?" My breath caught in my throat. I did remember. The woods. The hidden spot where the trees grew so thick no one else could find it. The place we weren't supposed to go. And the thing we dug up. There was no way he could know that. Unless he had been there. But that was impossible. Memories I had long buried clawed their way back. The woods. The summer I was 10 years old. A time when the world felt endless. The days stretched long with golden heat, and the woods behind my house were more than just trees and shadows. They were a world of their own. A kingdom where every hidden trail led somewhere new. Where I could be an explorer, a hunter, a warrior. But more than anything, they were our secret place. Me and who? My chest tightened. I tried to picture him, my friend, the one I had spent those days with, the one who had been there when we found it. But his face was a blur, like looking through fogged glass. Hadn't there been someone? My head throbbed as I forced myself to remember. That summer the heat was unbearable, the kind that made the pavement shimmer and the air feel heavy, pressing down like a second skin. But under the canopy of the woods it was different, cooler, darker, untouched by the sun's harsh glare. We spent every day out there, exploring, building forts, telling stories we made up on the spot. It was a place that belonged only to us. We had found the old oak in the deepest part of the woods, its massive trunk gnarled and twisted, its roots thick as serpents, reaching out from the earth like grasping fingers. There was something unnatural about that tree. Even then, I had felt it, the way it loomed, casting a shadow even when the sky was clear, the way the ground around it was always damp, even in the middle of a drought, the way the animals never went near it. And that was where we found it. It had started as a game, digging in the dirt, pretending we were looking for buried treasure, laughing as we made up stories about what we'd find. But then, the shovel struck something strange. Not rock, not wood. Something empty. I remember the way the soil collapsed beneath our hands, how the ground gave way too easily, as if the earth had been waiting for us to find it. And then we saw it. A hole, not a normal hole, not just some forgotten well or an animal burrow. It was wrong, perfectly round, too smooth, the edges unnaturally clean, like something had cut through the ground with precision. And it was deep, so deep that when we leaned over the edge, peering inside, we saw nothing. No bottom, no hint of where it ended, just darkness, an endless yawning blackness that seemed to pull at us, whispering without sound, urging us to come closer. I remember testing it, dropping a rock inside, waiting for the sound of it hitting the bottom. But there was nothing. No thud. No echo. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your bones feel hollow. A part of me wanted to run. A part of me knew we had found something we weren't supposed to. But we didn't run. We stayed. We kept looking. And that was when we noticed the markings, carved around the edge of the hole, circling it like a warning, were symbols, not letters, not anything I had ever seen before. Just deep, jagged shapes burned into the dirt itself, as if the earth had been branded long ago. And the moment I traced my fingers over them, the wind stopped. The forest went silent. "You really don't remember, do you?" The walkie-talkie crackled, the voice softer now, almost disappointed. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my mind to go back to see his face. But the harder I tried, the more my head ached, like something didn't want me to remember. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the walkie-talkie static, the voice crackling through the speaker like a whisper from somewhere I couldn't reach. "Hey, it's me. It's been so long." The words looped in my head, gnawing at something buried deep inside my memories, something I wasn't supposed to remember. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find proof. The attic had always been a graveyard of forgotten things. Dust-covered boxes, stacks of old newspapers, furniture draped in white sheets like abandoned ghosts. The wooden beams groaned beneath my weight as I moved through the dim space, the air thick with the scent of mildew and time. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just that I had to find it. A name, a clue, anything. I rifled through old keepsakes, pulling out yearbooks, birthday cards, faded Polaroids. My parents had saved everything, fragments of my childhood scattered across brittle paper and yellowing film. And then, my hands brushed against something different, a shoebox tucked behind a stack of dusty board games. It wasn't labeled. My breath caught as I lifted the lid. Inside, a photograph. It was old, the edges curling and worn. The ink had started to fade, but the image was clear enough to recognize myself immediately. I was young, no more than 10 or 11, standing in the middle of a dense forest. Sunlight streamed through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the ground. And next to me, another boy, a boy I should have remembered. But I didn't. His arm was draped over my shoulder like we were best friends, like we had spent years together. But his face was wrong. At first I thought the ink had smudged, that maybe the photo had been damaged by time. But the more I stared, the more I realized it wasn't smudged, it was blurred, like something had erased him, like something had reached into the past and wiped him from existence. My stomach turned. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. The longer I looked at it, the more my head throbbed, like something was pushing back, like my mind wasn't supposed to remember. A flash of something old surfaced in my thoughts. The woods, the summer heat, the deep, endless hole. I stumbled back, dropping the photograph, gasping for breath. And that's when the walkie-talkie crackled from across the room. Static filled the attic, the sound sharp and grating, crawling under my skin. Then, "You found it, didn't you?" The voice was too close now, like whoever was speaking was standing right behind me. I stared at the photo, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might shake the dust from the attic beams. The boy in the picture, the one I should have remembered, stared back at me. Or he would have, if his face hadn't been blurred away, erased by time, or something else. My hands trembled as I lifted the walkie-talkie from the attic floor. The static hissed and crackled, like a living thing squirming through the airwaves. Then, "You found it, didn't you?" The voice came through sharper this time, more defined, like whoever was speaking was getting closer, pushing through the veil of forgotten things. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the vast attic, swallowed by the creaking wood and the weight of my own unease. A pause. Then, "You stopped talking to me." The voice was different now, quieter, almost hurt. I waited for so long. A cold shudder crawled up my spine. Waited for what? I forced myself to ask. The static warped, twisting and bending like it was alive. "For you to come back." The word sent a jolt of unease through my chest. My grip on the walkie tightened. "I don't remember you," I admitted. Another pause. Longer this time. the kind of silence that listens back. Then, that's because you tried to forget me. The attic seemed smaller all of a sudden, the ceiling pressing down, the air thick with something unseen. I squeezed my eyes shut, tried to push back the headache, but the voice continued. You left me there, it whispered, softer now, like it was right behind me. You left me alone in the dark. I sucked in a sharp breath, every muscle in my body locking up. I wanted to argue, tell it that I didn't know what it was talking about. But something in my gut told me that wasn't true. I had left something behind. I had buried something in the woods. And now, it was coming back. The light bulb above me flickered, buzzing violently, casting erratic shadows across the attic walls. My breath hitched. Then, I'm closer now. My hands trembled as I dug deeper into the attic, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. There had to be more. Something to explain this. I shoved old books and yellowed newspapers aside, disturbing clouds of dust that swirled in the dim light. My fingers traced the edges of brittle cardboard boxes, searching, desperate, until I felt something thin and smooth beneath my fingertips. A photograph. Another one. I swallowed hard and pulled it from the pile, my pulse hammering in my ears. My stomach churned as I slowly turned it over. The boy was there. And this time, his face wasn't blurred. I saw him, and I remembered. He had dark hair, messy and sticking up at odd angles, like he had just run through the woods. His clothes were slightly torn, dirt smeared on his arms, as if we'd been climbing trees and playing all day. But it was his eyes that made my stomach drop. They were too intense, too real. Like he was looking through me, not at me. And the more I stared, the more the memories came flooding back. I was 10 years old. The summer had been long and hot, the kind where the air felt heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. I had spent most of my time in the woods behind my house, running through the trees, pretending I was an explorer, a treasure hunter. And I wasn't alone. There had been someone else, a friend, this boy, the one in the picture. But as soon as I thought of his name, a sharp pain stabbed through my skull. I hissed, pressing a hand to my forehead. Why couldn't I remember his name? Why had I forgotten him? I looked down at the photograph again, gripping it so tight my fingers ached. The memory was so close, just out of reach. And yet, I had no recollection of this boy existing before today. No birthday parties, no school days, no other photos, just this one. Like he had been wiped away from everything else, but not completely. Because now, he was coming back, and I had a terrible feeling. He wanted me to remember. His name was David, my childhood best friend. And the moment I remembered, it was like a floodgate burst open inside my head. Memories came crashing back, surging through my mind so violently that I had to clutch my forehead, struggling to breathe. David. How could I have forgotten him? We had done everything together, biking down the dirt roads until the sun dipped below the trees, building forts out of branches and old sheets, daring each other to climb the tallest trees in the forest behind my house. We were inseparable, brothers in everything but blood. But the strongest memory, the one I had buried so deep inside me, was that summer. The summer we found the hole. We had been wandering deep in the woods further than we ever had before, searching for buried treasure, old animal bones, anything mysterious to fuel our overactive imaginations. That was when we saw it. At first, we thought it was just a sinkhole, one of those strange, collapsed patches of earth that sometimes swallowed up trees and left dark, gaping wounds in the land. But this wasn't normal. The hole was perfectly round, like something had carved it intentionally. Its edges were too smooth, too unnatural for something formed by nature. And it was deep, so deep that we couldn't see the bottom. David picked up a rock and tossed it in. We waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. We never heard it hit the bottom. A cold, empty silence swallowed the sound whole. And then, something moved down there. A whisper drifted up from the darkness. Not words, not anything I could understand. But it called to us. The moment it happened, we dared each other to step closer. Closer. Just a little more. I don't remember if he lost his footing or if something pulled him. 1 second, he was beside me. The next, he was gone. I barely registered the sound of him screaming before it vanished, swallowed by the endless dark. I should have helped him. I should have run for help. I should have done something. But instead, I ran. For years, I told myself it was an accident, that I had panicked, that I had tried to find someone but gotten lost in the woods, that it wasn't my fault. But the truth, the horrible, gut-wrenching truth, was that I had left him there. I never told anyone about that day. Not my parents, not the police, no one. I had buried the memory as deep as that hole in the ground. And now, he was back. The walkie-talkie buzzed violently in my hand, shaking against my palm. The static hissed, whispering like a living thing. Then, a voice, soft, calm, familiar. Come outside. The words sank deep into my chest, an icicle of dread piercing through my ribs. I gripped the walkie-talkie so hard my knuckles ached. My throat felt tight, my breath coming out in short, uneven bursts. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I forced myself to take slow, shaky steps toward the window. The house felt too quiet, the air thick and unmoving, like the world itself was holding its breath. I reached the glass, my breath fogged against it. And there, at the tree line just beyond the reach of the porch light, a figure stood motionless. It was tall, its outline barely visible against the darkness. I squinted, my fingers trembling as I wiped away the condensation from the glass. It wasn't just a shadow, not some trick of the light. It was real, and it was watching me. A deep, guttural unease curled in my stomach, the same feeling I had that day in the woods when we had found the hole. I knew, somehow, impossibly, I knew who it was. It didn't move, not even a little. The way it stood was wrong, too still, too rigid, like it wasn't breathing, like it wasn't even trying to pretend to be human. But something inside me recognized it. I could feel it in my bones. David, the boy I had left behind, the friend I had abandoned, and he had come back for me. But he wasn't David anymore. The longer I stared, the more my vision adjusted to the dark. And that's when I saw. His arms were too long. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if his neck had been stretched. His eyes, God, his eyes, hollow, empty, but looking right at me. A twisted mockery of the boy I had once known. His body warped by something else. Something that had taken him and reshaped him into a thing that didn't belong in this world anymore. A thing that never should have come back. The walkie-talkie buzzed again. The static crackled louder now, a sharp electric hum that made my ears ring. Come outside. The same calm voice, the same familiar tone. But it wasn't a request. It was a command. I took a step back from the window, my breath hitching in my throat. My body screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but step outside. But deep down, I knew he wasn't going to wait much longer. The walkie-talkie was screaming now, the static tearing through the speaker like something alive, something angry. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was pressure. It filled the room, pressed against my skull, vibrated through my bones like an unseen force trying to crawl inside me. Then, a voice. "You left me in the dark." My breath hitched. I staggered backward, nearly dropping the walkie-talkie as the words echoed inside my skull, reverberating through my ribs like a second heartbeat. "You forgot me." "No." I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just coming from the walkie-talkie anymore. It was inside me. The house began to shake. The lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows against the walls. The air hummed, thick with an invisible charge, the pressure making my teeth ache, my head throb. Something was building, something I couldn't see but could feel. The static deepened, its frequency changing, twisting into something low, guttural, unnatural. Not quite a voice, not quite a sound, but something that existed in the space between them. And then, "Now it's your turn." A final burst of static, and everything went black. I wasn't sure how long I had been unconscious. Minutes? Hours? I lay on the floor, the wooden boards cold beneath me. For a moment, I thought I had gone deaf. There was nothing. No static, no humming. Just a vast, suffocating silence. Then, in the darkness, a sound. Faint, wet, like something dragging itself across the floor. I tried to move, but I couldn't try to breathe. But the air was thick, heavy, pressing against my chest. Something shifted nearby. Something close. And then, the walkie-talkie crackled back to life. But this time, the static wasn't coming from the speaker. It was coming from inside my own head. It wasn't noise anymore. It was whispers. Dozens of them, murmuring, hissing, crawling beneath my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingers digging into the floorboards. I wasn't alone. There was something else inside my mind, and it was getting louder. The darkness around me shifted, and I felt it. Felt him, standing just beyond my vision, watching, waiting. "You left me. Now you'll stay." The whispers swarmed inside my head, an unbearable pressure, a feeling like my thoughts weren't my own anymore. And as I opened my mouth to scream, the static swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was outside. The cold dirt pressed against my back, damp and unyielding. A deep, aching chill settled into my bones. For a moment, I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects, not even the distant howl of the wind. Just silence, a thick, oppressive stillness that made my skin crawl. Then, I saw it. The trees towered above me, their skeletal branches stretching endlessly into the sky, curling inward like gnarled fingers. The world around me felt different, as if the ground itself had shifted, as if the space I occupied wasn't meant for me anymore. But I knew where I was. I had been here before, and ahead of me, in the dirt, it was waiting, the hole in the woods. It was open now. I couldn't look away. The opening in the ground was wide, endless, swallowing all the light around it. The edges were jagged, as if the earth had been ripped apart from the inside. The longer I stared, the more my stomach twisted. It wasn't just a hole. It was something else, something alive. The dirt around it pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. The air above it shimmered, bending and warping like heat rising off pavement, except the air was cold, so cold. I felt it pulling at me, a slow, creeping tug, like invisible fingers wrapping around my ankles. And then, the walkie-talkie crackled beside me. I turned my head, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The walkie-talkie lay on the ground, half buried in the dirt, its speaker buzzing softly, like it had been waiting for me to wake up. I reached for it with a shaking hand. The static hissed. "You're not going to leave me this time." My fingers tightened around the device, my knuckles white. I knew that voice. It had been following me, whispering through the static, dragging itself through the cracks in my memories. David. He was in there. I could feel it. Could feel him, somewhere in the dark, waiting for me. The air shifted, thickening like a storm about to break. And then, the ground moved. A low, wet sound filled the air, like something stirring deep below the earth. And before I could react, something reached up and grabbed me. A hand, cold and skeletal, shot from the hole, fingers twisting around my wrist like iron shackles. I screamed. It yanked, hard. The dirt beneath me crumbled, and suddenly, I was sliding. My body dragged toward the darkness, the cold swallowing me whole. I clawed at the earth, kicking, thrashing, my free hand digging desperately for something to hold on to. But there was nothing. Nothing but the hole. Nothing but him. The last thing I saw was the trees shrinking above me, the sky pulling away. Then the darkness closed in, and the world was gone. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Click the bell icon so you never miss any new content. Stay tuned for more creepy stories coming soon. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the dark, subscribe for more. Because the best horror isn't what you hear, it's what follows when the story is over.